What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Michael and I've been battling enemies against myself and each other in this spot outside the Imperial City every day for over a week straight. Quite the life I lead. Today on FudgeMuppet, we're asking who is the strongest enemy in Oblivion and why is it this rat? Just kidding, maybe. We'll see. In this video, you will discover the strongest foe and all of the most powerful contenders as we explore just how out of control and deadly they become. There's definitely some high-ranking enemies almost no one will see coming. Oblivion's leveling system seems as if it was concocted by Sheogorath, the mad god himself, because as you get more powerful, you kind of get weaker relative to some other opponents. For the most part, being a low level in Oblivion is actually pretty chill. If you venture into the woods, you'll run into an angry wolf or a pesky imp, but at very high levels you can venture into the exact same area and be met by a vicious bear whose health has been scaled up dramatically to a tank-like state. It's no problem if you've built your character well, but if you've been more casual with your leveling, it's going to be a struggle. Thankfully, Oblivion has a difficulty slider you can change on the fly in emergencies. At the easiest, enemies deal 1/6 of their normal damage and you deal 6 times as much to them, but on the hardest setting, it's reversed, though summoned creatures are not affected in this way. Let's talk parameters. We'll be using the neutral difficulty setting where everyone's damage is as it was designed to be. However, sometimes I'll modify the difficulty setting temporarily to gain more insight into two seemingly equally matched foes. I'm also wearing Umbra's armor and shield while wielding the Umbra sword. I could have used high level enchanted armor at level 50, but I didn't want to mess with the results by having reflect damage enchantments and other things that might give certain enemy types an edge over others. But you're playing as a warrior, you might say. Well, I also did these experiments as an archer and as a strong mage to see the differences, but overall it didn't change much. My setup is pretty well rounded in general, even using an Imperial instead of another race like Bretons who may have a more powerful innate resistance. I also utilized a reasonable healing spell, as spells or potions would be very commonplace among high level players. Another parameter I used was not using specialized damage methods specific to quest items to weaken enemies and make them easier, as I wanted to fight them all on an even playing field. Also keep in mind that the winner today is based on performance, not stats. Sometimes the AI of a certain foe, like the spectral mud crab, is just terrible, and while they're tanky, it's just so easy to dodge their attacks and kill them. There's no use in crowning a meat shield winner if they have no shot at killing you. Some enemies are unexpectedly aggressive or are really good at making you stagger or dodging attacks, so all of this is taken into account. I'm also assuming that at level 50, the player is competent at the game controls and is relatively skilled at combat as a result. Therefore, there may be some slight subjective elements in the rankings if I find an enemy easy to dodge and run circles around, but someone else doesn't. As a final parameter, the strongest enemy in Oblivion has to be an actual enemy. Certain NPCs or entities are just not meant to be fought. Mehrunes Dagon, for example, is an enemy you're not supposed to be able to kill or not supposed to fight. I know I killed him as a kid with some crazy enchanted arrow exploit to have insane levels of damage, but outside of that it's not really going to happen unless you use a specific workaround with Wabberjack or use console commands. When he dies, he kind of just melts into the ground, but it's not supposed to happen, and funnily enough, the same thing happens when you get a knockdown effect on him. You can see just how glitchy and borderline cursed messing with Dagon or multiple Dagons can look. You can tell I had fun making this video. Another NPC who isn't an enemy but could be theorized as the strongest is Sheogorath, because if you attack his 10,000 point health bar, he teleports you above punishment point where you fall to your doom. Not even God mode protects you from death. But let's get into the real contenders, enemies who are supposed to be battled. The craziest enemies in Oblivion have their level and damage and health based on equations that involve your level. This might look something like 10 multiplied by your level minus 5. So if your level is 50, it's 10 times 45, which is 450 health. Quite hefty and more deadly when applied to damage equations. If you're wondering where I pull enemy stats from, I'm doing it with the getav console command. In general, testing humanoid enemies was quite different to fighting monsters, as some of them have much better movement and can feel tougher when they have enchanted weapons, the ability to disarm you, knock you down with backwards power attacks, or just have a shield, shield, which they'll use to bash you away and cause stagger. We'll explore this category first. Testing these opponents against each other provided a lot of insight into their power levels, but ultimately it was multiple fights against me which determined the true winners. One decently strong opponent is the Blackwood Company Guard found in Glade Mist Cave during the Fighters Guild quest Information Gathering. While you're level 50, he's going to have 400 points of health and is garbed in daedric armor wielding daedric weaponry. He can also use a Blackwood shield, though doesn't always wear greaves, leaving him less protected. His boss level blunt weapon may also be enchanted. He proved to be a harder fight than any standard high level bandit or marauder in the game. Remember, this was all tested while my character was level 50, however the Blackwood Guard still couldn't dish out enough damage to make me worried, and he also failed the rat test. That is to say, the secret powerful rat we'll end up discussing killed him pretty easily with constant stagger and aggression to match. A tankier NPC I battled against is known as Kurden's Orc Hunter. So there's this side quest where you get lured to a fort that certain individuals have paid to be in to enjoy hunting you. At level 50, this Orc Hunter will have 412 health and a full set of daedric armor, including a daedric shield and mace. He seems just as aggressive as the Blackwood Guard, but harder to kill than just 12 extra health points. I'd say it's due to the extra armor and the shield. Sadly for him, he just couldn't damage me fast enough to be a true challenge. With shorter reach than a sword due to his mace, he was more like a massive meaty annoyance, and that just doesn't cut it for top rankings. The enemies on this list almost always have high enough weapon skills to cause knockdowns, and in the next case I can confirm 100 in all melee weapon skills, as well as heavy armor block, athletics, and hand-to-hand. This vicious foe is Umbra, a well-known enemy that many would remember being a challenging boss battle. Umbra comes in a full set of ebony, wielding the Umbra sword, which has the highest base damage of any one-handed weapon in the game. She has 394 points of health and 338 points of fatigue, which is Oblivion's word for stamina, granting her near constant power attacks, which she's very good at. Despite her slightly lower health, having a strong sword and effective AI means that Umbra would defeat the previous two enemies in most of their battles and proved tougher for me than they did. She also has a restore health ability which heals 2 points per second. Not much, but every bit counts when you're dealing with deadly fighters. Umbra is also super fast, having 100 speed, and she's tough with 100 strength and 100 endurance. Ultimately, she is a good fighter, however, similarly to the other two, she doesn't seem to have enough raw damage output to truly worry me. I feel like enchanted weapons really go a long way, but the Umbra sword only has a soul trap effect, so no extra damage. Again, I'd rate her AI very highly, it's just DPS that's missing. Also, Mankar Cameron is one enemy that some might expect to be quite strong at high levels, as his health is based on your level. However, it still doesn't work out particularly high, only reaching 247. That said, his magicka is 450 and he comes with a lot of natural abilities. In addition to the plus 50 magicka from a custom birth sign, his race grants him plus 100 magicka, 75% resist disease, and a drawback 25% weakness to fire, frost, and shock, but then he somehow has Nord bonuses, in particular 50% resist frost and 50% resist shock. He then has the Breton racial bonus of 50% resist magic, and his custom birth sign also delivers Fortify Sneak 100 points, so you can't be stealthy against him. It also grants Reflect Damage 25%, Reflect Spell 25%, Spell Absorption 25%, and Shield 25 points, not to mention his robe has 10% Reflect Damage and 20 points of Spell Absorption. On top of that, he also has the standard Mage birth sign, giving him plus 50 magicka. He seemed a popular choice online for a tough opponent, but he's not strong enough to make it into the very top ranks of this video. His raw damage output isn't that high, and if you're quick to kill him, you can get him into a stagger and stop him from healing or casting other protective spells. He wastes plenty of time with his kind of weak staff instead of using his higher damage destruction spells, although one hard part is the reflect damage that he has. That's what mostly drops my health bar. He also doesn't fight hyper aggressively, and while he can summon a Storm Atronach, heal, silence you, and has that leveled destruction spell, it somehow sounds so much more dangerous on paper than in reality. Don't get me wrong, he's still more likely to kill you than Umbra, but he's not out of this world dangerous. If any other enemies pop into your mind as you're watching, you'll just have to trust that I've almost definitely tested it, but I couldn't cover hundreds of foes in one video without it being way too long. One conditional enemy that you only fight if you side with the Dark Seducers in the Shivering Isles DLC is the Golden Saint named Ormazul Khane. She fights competently against all the humanoid enemies mentioned so far and seems better at dealing damage than most of them when fighting me. She has more health than Umbra, having 424 HP, and her use of magic in addition to a sword and shield makes fighting her feel a bit like fighting Umbra but with spells. She has 100 in the blade and block skills and can cast a variety of Golden Saint spells and seems to prefer ranged shock damage. But the two strongest enemies in the humanoid category are actually Frath and Drathan, and 2 of the 5 afflicted brethren. That said, Frathan can sometimes feel very easy if he has a poor setup. Even Mankar can feel stronger in the right conditions, particularly if you're playing as an archer, but overall Frathan has better blocking capabilities and aggressive AI, meaning that instead of just soaking up sword swings, he'll probably block and then send out a backwards power attack, potentially knocking you down, and if his sword is enchanted, perhaps setting you on fire. But let's cover the afflicted brethren first, because there's actually 5 in the game, and they're the Azura worshippers who ended up as vampires locked in gutted mine. Of the 5, only the 2 orcs make the cut for this video, and only if they're using an enchanted weapon, which they have a chance of wielding. Using a note from one of the bodies, we can find their true names to be Gola Gromazgol and Uma Grakar. For the male, Gola, he seems strongest with a fire damage daedric sword and a shield, and the female, Uma, with a frost damage daedric warhammer. Both of these orcs fight incredibly well, and defeated the other NPCs we've mentioned more often than not. The warhammer wielding female orc Uma has 375 health, and the male orc's health is 422. That said, Uma actually casts spells, having destruction and restoration capabilities. Similarly to what enchantment she gets, if she gets one, her spell choice can make a big difference. I find her to be most deadly with not only a frost enchanted warhammer, but also a leveled frost or shock damage spell, be it area based or just a standard projectile. They deal solid damage and just give her more capability on top of her already highly aggressive AI, knockdown capabilities, and powerful gear. Both of these orcs are wearing daedric armor pieces, and they're also vampires, which can alter various resistances and stats also. But wait, there's more. All of the afflicted brethren have this innate group of powerful buffs, which make them tougher than you'd expect. We're talking 30 points extra of shield, of health, of strength, of speed, of blade, of blunt, and even of luck, and then 20 extra points of agility. There's just no doubt these 2 orcs end up quite the menace, as many important skills like blade and blunt end up at 130. The other opponent we must talk about is a rogue Telvanni mage, a Dunmer named Frathan Drathan. Many Elder Scrolls fans may not know of him as he was not part of the main game, Knights of the Nine, or the Shivering Isles DLC. Instead, he featured in the Mehrunes Razor DLC, acting as the leader of the Drothmeri army. This is a group of rebel-type operators who seek to undermine the Empire. Frathan is searching tirelessly for the Razor, and you eventually end up fighting him while trying to get the artifact for yourself. While you're level 50, Drathan will be wearing glass gauntlets and boots and wielding a sword, be it a daedric longsword or a daedric claymore. These can be enchanted, and despite being a magic user, he is particularly good at melee combat and has pretty high DPS and competent fighting patterns. His robes and hood are unique, granting him at the highest levels 15% reflect damage, 15% resist normal weapons, 17% shield, 15% reflect spell, 15% magic resistance, and 15 points of spell absorption. He's not the tankiest of foes with 245 health and not much armor, but there's no benefit to being as tanky as some of the previous contestants if you can't churn out some damage. Frathan definitely does dish out damage fast, especially if his sword comes with a 20-point shock damage enchantment, not to mention he'll be turning your own damage back on you. He conjures daedra as well, and I must say to rank him for this video, I'd be going with the Storm Atronach or a Claymore-wielding Dremora as his most useful summon. Against other enemies we've talked about, he may win or lose, but he's much harder for the actual player to fight, which is what we're talking about today. His use of spells also increases his DPS capabilities. He seems to cause a lot of stagger, and with him and his summon getting up in your face at the same time, things can be quite annoying. So as far as humanoid contestants go, it can look neck and neck with Frathan and any one of the afflicted brethren orcs, so long as they all spawn with their most optimal setups. But I actually scaled up the difficulty to the 3/4 point to escalate things and pick a winner. Fighting Frathan was like playing Dark Souls, and it legitimately took me 20 minutes to kill him in this open green area where I had room to run away from him and his Dremora, and I I constantly had to heal every time I hit him because it would reflect damage on myself massively, and then the only way to kill him was to hope to paralyze him with a front moving power attack once his Dremora disappeared, constantly slash his paralyzed body, then run away and heal while trying to dodge as many of his powerful destruction spells as I could. Funnily enough, I got surprisingly good at dodging and Oblivion combat in general as a side effect of all this research, so Drathan was almost impossible to beat with this setup. However, when I used the same difficulty setting against any of the Orc afflicted brethren, it was simply impossible to win the fight with the setup picked for this video. Their melee attacks took off ridiculous chunks of my health bar, not to mention they start the battle with an invisibility spell. Furthermore, the female Orc had a ranged shock spell stronger than any of her frost options I'd seen earlier, which took off about 75% of my health bar in a single blast. Her and Drathan could also heal, which was very frustrating. I think that all round this makes the female afflicted brethren the strongest humanoid NPC, especially against all varieties of builds. As a warrior, the male Orc Gola was actually harder for me to kill on this difficulty, but if we account for all build types, a fast archer could just run away from him for a long time and make him a pincushion for ages, whereas Uma has ranged capabilities of deadly magnitude to fight back. I suppose this gives her the ultimate crown of this category. But enough of these NPCs, Michael. Where do all the creatures, monsters, daedra, and even gods fit into this? Well, let's put that difficulty back to neutral and see what we can deduce. As for animals, there's generally nothing too scary. One worth mentioning is a special bear called the West-Wheeled Brown Bear Den Hunter. This is the strongest variant of this bear encountered during the quest called Bear Season. It has 550 points of health, 325 fatigue, and deals 70 points of melee damage per strike. This damage is absolutely massive. However, I found the bear's AI to be easy enough to dodge and move away from, and the actual reach of the bear's swipes is not that far. It was still able to defeat the Blackwood Company Guard, one of the lower ranking NPCs we've examined so far. And now it's time to shine some light on the mystery. Weighing in at level 40 with a massive 800 points of health and 1000 points of fatigue, we have the infamous, the one and only Rat. So there's this one particular rat you can find in the Skingrad Manor basement of a Breton noble named Lazar Milvan. For whatever reason, this rat was left here by the developers with health and damage output that increase with your level. With plenty of speed and crazy amounts of stagger, this rodent dishes out 23 points of damage per bite. Now, I've been able to kill it without too much of a problem, so it won't be going home with the gold medal today, but it sure is aggressive, and if you do happen to stagger way too many times, you can very well meet your end. The rat can often win against all the NPCs mentioned so far, although he loses most of the battles against some of the strongest ones, like the Afflicted Brethren, that Golden Saint, Mankar, and Drathan, but only the latter two because their conjured companions draw away damage. I'd rank this rat around the same level as Umbra, honestly, which is pretty wild. Looking at creatures in general, remember they're not wearing armor, and therefore they can sound way tankier than some NPCs, despite feeling similar in terms of how long it takes to deplete their health. I'm sure Minotaur lords spring into many Elder Scrolls fans' minds. These massive man-bull beasts come in swinging their ebony warhammers with health 22 times the player's level. At level 50, this means we're looking at 1100 health points, and they have a special headbutt attack which causes 25 points of damage health, disintegrates armor on touch, and grants them immunity to silence. You don't want to get hit by that, especially with their forward power attacks which can cause paralysis, but their normal attacks definitely feel similar to some of the lower ranking NPCs discussed earlier. They're also not as fast or aggressive as these NPCs, meaning that while they're a hefty meat shield, they're definitely not the biggest threats for a well-equipped character. However, there is an unarmed Minotaur Lord variant which is actually much stronger. Due to the level scaling, the unarmed attacks can end up at 49 points of damage, and the Minotaur seems better at unleashing them than their Warhammer swings. Overall, this makes the unarmed Minotaur Lord rank higher, and definitely the only Minotaur to deserve a spot in this video, being a bit tougher than the West-Wheeled Bear and able to defeat the rat most of the time. That said, this Minotaur is still slow enough for the player to outmaneuver, and I'd rather fight it than the rat simply because of this. A fight against the Minotaur Lord is only tight if it staggers you and gets multiple hits off in quick succession. Similar to the Minotaurs in the the sense that they're strong but have movement that's easy to dodge, are ogres and trolls. Standard ogres have leveled stats, so when you're level 50, their health is 1222, with melee strikes dealing about 45 damage each. Ogres can really get you staggering and take ages to kill, but if you just stand still, wait for them to begin an attack and then start running backwards, it's pretty easy to avoid damage. A strong variant is the Redguard Valley Ogre Chieftain from the Sins of the Father quest, which has 1060 health, but each melee strike deals about 61 damage. Very lethal. It also miraculously has 13,250 fatigue points. Ogres could defeat Frath and Drathan easily, though against my actual character, I still find Frathan to be harder simply due to having better movement and striking patterns. As for trolls, the Painted Troll from the A Brush with Death quest really packs a punch, dealing 37 damage per strike and possessing 1,250 health and 2,250 fatigue. I'd say their combat AI is a bit better than ogres, but it's still easy enough to learn and fight against compared to humanoid enemies. The Kalpaclan and Azclan trolls from the Tidewater Cave area where you go for Nocturnal's quest are also competent enough, with 40 damage per strike and 1,000 points of health and 2,500 points of fatigue. Just to make a point, I could easily defeat these monsters when turning the difficulty up to the 3/4 point, just with dodging and striking and being patient. Compare that to it being extremely tough against Frathan and impossible against the Afflicted Brethren with the same setting. As for Undead, Liches are of course an enemy that seem to be a nuisance for high level players. Your standard Lich can become more of a threat than any foe mentioned so far, but only if they spawn with the best setup, which is rare. They need to have a strong destruction staff and or favor a very strong destruction spell. The problem with many Liches, particularly unique ones like Lorgar and Benorus, is that they will prefer casting their weak staff over and over while you kill them, or they stick to weaker spells for whatever reason. Sometimes you get unlucky though, and a standard Lich will spawn with a shock staff that does 35 points of damage for 2 seconds, so 70 damage pretty quick, and a destruction spell that does a similar amount. They can be easy to dodge and slash at times, but if they get you, they'll kill you incredibly fast. The strongest Lich I found tended to be the King of Miskarkand, in the sense that it seemed to spawn with the better setups, and has slightly more health than a standard Lich, coming in at 765 HP. Liches also have resistances and special buffs. Reflect Spell 25%, Resist Disease 100%, Resist Frost 100%, Resist Magic 25%, Resist Poison 100%, Spell Absorption 25%, Water Walking but a weakness to fire of 25%. Throw on top of that thou summon something to distract you and be pesky, and it's a deadly mix. Sometimes the King of Miskarkand can spawn with a Drain Magicka staff, which actually makes him deadlier because then it forces him to rapidly cast his offhand destruction spell, which can be really strong over and over to deal damage. Do remember, a poorly set up Lich doesn't even belong in this video at all. Wraiths can also be tough if they cause stagger, but they're also an easy enemy to run circles around and dodge and slash and stagger. Two notable ones would be the Sanctified Ancient Spectre and Gable the Traitor, who both have over 1000 health, as does a leveled Gloom Wraith, but I just can't place them anywhere super significant, as similar to ogres, their AI is just not good enough, and they're usually really slow movers too. As for common daedra, the non-unique variants end up weak. I tested Clanfears, Daedroths, Atronachs, Zivali, Dremora, anything you can think of. Even the Storm Atronach, the sunken one, was easy enough to defeat. Anaxes, a hand-to-hand fighting Zivali from Mankar Cameron's Realm of Paradise, is strong for what he is, but can easily be defeated in the same way you'd fight off a Minotaur Lord. Only two specific variants stood out as being worthy of mention. The first is a special Clanfear only found during Vaymina's Daedric quest in Arkved's Lost Halls. Its health levels with you ending up at 867. Its damage levels also getting to about 56. Like all Clanfears, it has a 20% weakness to shock, but reflects 20% damage back at you and has a 33% resistance to fire. They truly are the rats of Oblivion, and like the powerful rat in this video, Clanfears cause a lot of stagger, meaning that this particularly strong Clanfear ranks about equally with an Afflicted Brethren. Turn up the difficulty to 75% and it creams you pretty fast. Same goes for a special Mended Flesh Atronach. This one variant is only found in certain locations and comes with 500 health, basic healing capabilities, fire and damage damage health spells, but solid melee damage of 51 points. It has 30% fire resistance, 30 spell absorption, 25% reflect spell, full resistance to poison, and 30% weakness to shock. While it may sound weaker than the clan fears stats wise, it's actually tougher as it also causes stagger and is even better at connecting a flurry of melee attacks together, pushing your health bar down fast. We've covered a lot of ground so far, so what else is there? Well, if we were to make a top 10 list, or a top 11 list I guess, I'd be starting with Frath and Drathan at 11, and then the Afflicted Brethren and this powerful clan fear just making it into position numbers 9 and 10. So long as the clan fear doesn't have a bad day and lands its usual amount of staggers, I'd call it a tie in terms of how difficult it is to win against. Then in position number 8, I'd put a beast from the Shivering Isles known as the Gnarl Elder. This tree-like entity has 816 health points, 720 fatigue, and deals 46 damage per melee strike. It also casts a silence spell that somehow seems harder to dodge than those cast by wraiths. This spell also deals 25 points of damage health and can be quite a hassle if you're a mage, although if you can avoid being silenced, the Gnarl's weakness is found in using lots of different elemental attacks. When hit by one, the Gnarl grows bigger and becomes resistant to that element, but it becomes weak to other elements which you can use to deal more damage. The Gnarl Elder causes plenty of stagger against you too, but the one downfall is that its movement patterns are not too difficult to predict, so you can dodge its attacks. I'm not saying it's as easy to cheese as an ogre, but it's a similar principle, and if we're talking top 10 enemies, then it's a drawback here. In spot 7, we're actually fighting against Umril the Unfeathered, the final boss in the Knights of the Nine DLC. Born of an Ayleid mother and a divine father, Umril has the power to drop your health bar very fast. He wields a claymore that he can swing in one hand, but its exact damage is hard to figure out because it's technically a different item to the one you actually pick up when you kill him. Still, I can tell you that in one swipe, he dropped my health by 83 points. This includes the shock damage that his sword deals, and it also damages fatigue, meaning that if your fatigue drops below 0 because he hits you after you've unleashed a bunch of power attacks, you actually fall down and give him even more opportunity to do a 3-slash combo on you. He's got 33% resistance to magic and another 33% resistance to fire and 100% resistance to shock. Your saving grace is that despite having a high DPS, Umril only has 460 health, which is why he didn't rank higher, as you can kill him quite fast if you fight well enough. Remember, he doesn't have actual armor like daedra for additional protection. A final drawback of his is casting his spell too often, when he should just focus on slashing. Called Mortal Light, this spell does 3 points of damage magicka and shock damage for 14 seconds on the target. In rank number 6, we actually have a perfectly set up King of Miskarkhand or a perfectly set up Standard Lich. They're almost exactly the same thing, and there's no need to go over their powerful stats again. Just remember that while a Lich can sometimes be staggered lots with a flurry of standard attacks, if they do have that awesome strong staff, strong destruction spell set up, they can turn you to dust very fast. In position number 5, we actually have that specific mended flesh Atronach we talked about just before. I've already covered its stats, but let me just reiterate how much this abomination can stagger you and link up devastating combos and even chase you down with fairly accurate jumping attacks. It seems to kill me as fast as Umril, but is a bit harder to kill and has the capacity to heal itself with magic. Position 4 is really interesting, almost tied with position 3, so keep that in mind. Perhaps you even find it to be stronger if you do some level 50 battle experimentation. Introducing another one of Sheogorath's pets, the Elytra Matron. The standard variant of the Elytra Matron would rank in this exact spot, but for the purposes of not having two matrons in the top 10, there's another matron that's about 5% harder to kill, only found in a particular spot. This beast has 700 HP, 850 fatigue, and 2 spells, Mystic Venom and Mystic Death. The Venom ranged attack causes 3 points of damage health for 15 seconds for a total of 45 damage, as well as 2 points of damage magicka for 15 seconds, totaling 30. Mystic Death is touch-based and does 1 point of damage health and magicka, but for 100 seconds, totaling 100 damage to each attribute, of course. The Elytra Matron has 50% poison resistance and 20% weakness to magic, and interestingly can walk on water, so don't think you'll be escaping across the river so easily. However, its main advantage is actually its long-reaching melee attacks, dealing 41 points of damage and causing frequent stagger. A matron can actually unleash 4 or 5 of these in quick succession if you're unlucky, and they can hit from further away than you'd expect. The matron can also competently block melee strikes, and has leaping attacks also for when you try to run. I've seen the matron absolutely destroy the next enemy on this list, although the battle can go either way, and I'd say that based on the player experience, I'm gonna have to give the bronze medal to Jiggalag today. Jiggalag is the antagonist of the Shivering Isles DLC and quite literally a god. He is the daedric Prince of Order, and Sheogorath has you fight against him to stop the Grey March and save the Shivering Isles from total destruction. I find it funny that he's almost on the same level as a big angry bug from the Isles, but I guess he still came out on top just for being a bit harder for the actual player to fight. Jiggalag has a hefty 1000 points of health, 250 magicka, 1250 fatigue, 4 resistance to paralysis, 20% resistance to magicka, and 50% resistance to poison. He has a huge two-handed sword that he can swing in just one hand, dealing 57 melee damage per strike. He frequently casts a 45 point damage shock spell that affects a 10-foot area, and in many ways he's a bit like a bigger, stronger version of Umril the Unfeathered. He can string together a flurry of high damage attacks, and his long legs make him a fast mover who is hard to get away from. He has an ability that lets him constantly regenerate 5 points of health, and then a wildcard spell known as Touch of Order. He doesn't use this too much, but what it does do is send out 12 points of frost damage in a 15-foot area for 3 seconds, while absorbing 16 points of health from the target, and most importantly, it throws its targets to the ground. Being knocked down and unable to dodge, block, or fight back against Jiggalag can quickly mean game over. But what's stronger than a god? How about a fish? Coming in at spot number 2, we have the giant Slaughterfish from the Arrow of Extrication quest in the Thieves Guild storyline. As a child, this moment scared me quite a bit, and to this day I still feel a bit cautious as I swim down into the deep of the Breville Wizard's Grotto. Being in water, this battle is different to all the other battles, but if the parameters for this video involve looking at what foe is the biggest challenge for the player, then we've got to include it. If you try to spawn the giant Slaughterfish with console commands, it appears much smaller and just flops about on land, but in its natural environment, in the water, we'll fight this hulking fish with 1000 points of health that deals 35 points of damage with each attack. It often swims in a circle after each strike, coming back to deal more damage, stag you, which it's great at, and then kind of swim away and then come back for more. Arrows aren't too useful underwater, as you'd expect. Ranged spells can't be used, and melee attacks are limited to standard strikes. No master level power attacks to paralyze or expert knockdown strikes will function down here. Now, I'm not saying the giant Slaughterfish is unkillable on level 50, but with the set character that I used to experiment for this video, it was very hard. Even with unlimited water breathing potions, high damage touch-based spells which do work underwater, my healing spell, and the Umbra sword swinging as fast as I could, this fish was near impossible to take down. The way I felt fighting it was that I couldn't afford to miss more than one swing or touch damage spell as I tried frantically to end its health bar before it ended mine. Put it this way, of anything mentioned so far, which are mainly fought on neutral difficulty unless I need more insight, the giant Slaughterfish is the biggest challenge of the lot. And yes, it's because you have to fight it in the water, but I can't see why that shouldn't count. However, there is one final enemy to talk about, a gargantuan monster who has become as iconic as he is hard to kill. Coming into first place, we have none other than the mighty Gatekeeper. I absolutely love this flesh magic creation, and I'd highly recommend you check out my video I did all about flesh magic linked in the description below. But what makes the Gatekeeper the strongest? Well, like the other high-ranking enemies, the Gatekeeper can land hits in quick succession, dealing 58 damage per strike, so it's definitely enough to smash you to bits. But the main problem here is that in addition to plenty of damage coming at you, with long reach I might also add, the Gatekeeper's health constantly regenerates 20 points per second to be exact, so even if you paralyzed him, which you can't because he has full resistance, power attack after power attack will still not wear him down that fast. In fact, the best strategy seems to be an onslaught of standard attacks at his knees and just pray he staggers endlessly. The thing is though, you may get off to a good start with staggers and take his health down a massive 30% before he's even touched you, but before you know it, before you can kill him, he slashes you into a constant stream of staggers, or worse, throws you away with this touch spell, and by the time you pick yourself up and dust yourself off, he's almost back to full health. His total health acts quite weird. When you first meet him in the Shivering Isles and see him fighting off a bunch of warriors, he actually has 1800 HP, but when you're doing the quest about killing him, he has 800 health when you go to battle him. Obviously 1800 HP just makes him super overpowered, but even if we use 800 as the measurement, he still easily makes it into position number 1. He also has a 75% resistance to magic if regaining 20 health constantly wasn't bad enough, and his fatigue is 750. His lifeless touch spell not only throws you through the air and to the ground, but also damages 18 points of health for 3 seconds. This all adds up. There's just no doubt this Guardian of the Shivering Isles is the hardest enemy to beat, with high damage that often staggers you plenty of health, damage health spells with knockdown effects, and freakishly fast health regen. What's stronger than this isn't technically an enemy you're supposed to fight, but it's the second Gatekeeper that you rebuild in the Shivering Isles plot, which has 11,340 health, 1,260 magicka, and 34,650 fatigue. Just ridiculous. That, ladies and gentlemen, concludes this video on the strongest enemy in Oblivion. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it and appreciate how much testing went into it, and please let me know your most dreaded enemy in Oblivion in the comments. Subscribe for more Elder Scrolls content. Social media links are in the description, as is a link to our merch if you want to buy an awesome FudgeMuppet tee and help support our content. I'm Michael from FudgeMuppet, and I look forward to nerding out with you again very soon.